So with that, I will hand it over to Jenny.
Great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We'll start by doing the, obligatory plug for Scismic. So it was started by two scientists, so not material scientists, but biologists and neuroscientists, Danica and Elizabeth. And essentially they were struggling. They were in academia. They wanted to move to industry. It was a pain. There was no clear path. It was hard to find answers. And they were like, there's a better way. We know there is. And so they made it. And so that's what we hope to be, right? We want to serve as a guide for scientists who want to move into industry careers. Material science is one of the places that we specialize in. So we have events like this one and other more general events throughout the year, one every month, and it's always free. The other way we help you is that we match you to roles based on what you know, not who you know. So if you create a profile on Scismic and you tell us that, hey, I work with Arduino circuits, or I specialize in Ruby on Rails, or, I work a lot with polychemicals or nanomaterials, we will only show you jobs that match your particular interest area within the material sciences. And we take into account your degree, your years of experience, whether or not you need a visa. So you kind of don't have to do the hard work of like, is this job for me? If we send you a job, then you know that it's already a good fit for you. And because of that, you are 5 times more likely to get called back when you do apply through Scismic. So that is essentially what we help do. And we'll get right into it because I want to have plenty of time for questions as well at the end. So I understand you guys have done job descriptions, you've done networking. So now we're going to kind of do everything on the other end of the of the pipeline there. So from applying to interviewing, negotiating once you've gotten an offer, and then follow-up, which is actually at each of those stages, but I just threw it in at the end for the sake of coherence. So let's make this a little interactive. Tell me about where you currently do apply to jobs. Like what are the ways that you guys are currently submitting applications? And if you want to chat, you can unmute yourself and say something, or you can just type it in the chat if you're feeling shy. Okay, we have a hand raised. You can, Brian. Oh, I don't know if he can unmute himself. There you go.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. So I guess mostly on the company website. So like I'll find it on LinkedIn, but my intuition is to like follow that to find the same role on the company site and apply there so that I know it went in. So I'm a little paranoid about applying through an external site.
Cool. We'll talk about that. Yeah. Cool. Anybody else apply through other means besides the company website or a LinkedIn job post or a job post from any other place? Okay. No. All right. So the 4 main areas that people usually think of, and Brian, thank you, because you mentioned too, right? You have the company website, obviously. You've got the job posts, which could be on LinkedIn, it could be on Indeed, it could be on a specialized job board. You might be part of a material science association that has its own job board, and so you can find jobs that way. You might apply through a friend or colleague if you have a referral or a way in. Or you might be approached by a recruiter and submit your application through a recruiter. So to give you a kind of a clue as to why, like what happens on the employer side when you do that. So complicated map, but we'll walk through it. Most companies, particularly larger companies, have what's called an applicant tracking system. So it's ATS. And that is where they house all the information about everybody who's applied. So as Brian mentioned, if you apply through a job post or you apply through the company website, either way, as long as there's nothing wrong with their API, your application will go into this pool, this ATS pool, right? If you apply through a recruiter, it depends, right? The recruiter may be working directly with the human resources department in the middle here, or the talent acquisition specialist, or they might pipeline right into that ATS, just like any of the other way. Or if a recruiter has a particularly good relationship with the hiring manager, the person who's actually going to be making the decision, they might go directly to them. Usually if the recruiter goes to the HR then pumps it back into the ATS before funneling it back down to the hiring manager. Same thing if you have a friend that works in the company and they're referring, there's a referral program that almost always goes directly into the ATS system. But sometimes your friend might know the hiring manager personally, and there's a chance that it could go directly to the HR person or to the hiring manager. So all these methods have different ways of entering into the system. And Brian's intuition of like, is one better? Should I apply through the company website? Well, actually, they all end up in the ATS anyway. So essentially, they're all going to the same place, but he's not necessarily wrong in thinking about, okay, like, would it be better if I did it one way over the other? And what I would say is that every time you interact with this ATS, so you apply through the company website, if Brian then goes back and also applies through that LinkedIn job post, now the ATS has seen him twice, which means the HR team has had to interact with him twice, see him twice, and they realize, oh, this candidate is very interested because they took the time to apply twice, right? So we now know that he is on our radar as somebody who is hyper curious about this role and isn't just kind of like spamming the internet's job posts with their resume and applying to everything, right? So the more channels that you can use to apply, the better. And just kind of a clue as to like, where does Scismic fit in all this? So we actually kind of come in before the job post itself, right? What I mentioned before is like, what will only show you job posts when you match. So you're not going to see every job post, but the job posts you do see, we work directly with the hiring manager and the HR talent acquisition teams. And it's a two-way street. So when you apply on LinkedIn or you apply on the company website, it's kind of a one-way street, right? Your application goes in, but you rarely, I mean, I wish this was different, but you don't always get information back. But because we're working directly, we can check in, and we do have check-ins weekly to be like, hey, we sent you this candidate. What do you think? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And we get feedback. So we can then pass that feedback back on to you. So that's another way we help, is we can be a little bit more aggressive about like feedback and following up with them than a candidate might be comfortable with. So that's another way we can help. But yes, the answer is it's better to apply with as many channels as you have access to. And final tip for applying, follow the directions. So if in the application process or the job description where it says to apply, if they tell you we only accept applications from the company website, only apply to the company website. If they say, write your resume on pink paper and sign it with a yellow ribbon, do that, right? So part of the reason that they sometimes include like weird instructions in the job description is they want to make sure that you aren't just spamming, right? They want to know that you've read it, you care about this job. So they will sometimes sandwich like kind of a weird thing in there that they want you to do. And if you don't follow it, that's their screening method. They aren't even going to bother with the rest of it. So if they don't ask for a cover letter, don't include it. If they do ask for a cover letter, do include it. I'm going to underline it. Follow the directions. It's so important. I'm going to even highlight it because it's that important. Follow the directions. Whatever they say is their preferred method of applying is what you should do. Okay. Whew, on to interviewing. So you've done that, right? You found the perfect job. You've applied. You're excited. You're like, let's do this interview. We have a 3-step process before you can, oh, wait, sorry. Whoops. All right. Interview. I'm sorry. I was thinking about, yeah. So how many of you, just raise your hand, feel like when you go for an interview, it's actually an interrogation? How many of you, like, you can raise your Google hands or just to see. A lot of people, it looks like. Yeah. Me too, usually, right? What I want you to do is try to change that mindset. An interview shouldn't feel like an interrogation where the goal is just to get through it to the next stage, or sometimes, frankly, just to get through it. You should shift it and think of it more as a first date, right? It is about learning about each other. You want to learn about the company. You want to learn about the team you might be working with. You want to learn about the role, right? It's a give and take. It's a building of that, hopefully, employee-employer relationship from the very earliest stages. You're looking for red flags, for reasons this job might not be a good fit for you. And they're doing the same. They're looking for reasons why you as an employee may not fit with what the organization needs. So it's a time of exploration. It's a time of curiosity. It's a time of just conversation, of just getting to know one another. And once you take the stakes off of being like, I must do my best and be great, to I'm just learning, I'm just trying to find out more information, you can relax more. You're going to feel more comfortable in the interview, and it's going to go better generally. So preparing is the key to a good interview. And there are 3 steps to that preparation. You want to research, review, and then rehearse. So let's go through each one of those. Research. 47% of employers will pass on a candidate who has little or no knowledge of the company. 47%. So that means if you take this time to research the company before you go into the interview, you already have a 50-50 chance of getting through that interview to the next stage, because you've done that work, and a lot of candidates don't, right? So you want to know about their products and services. You want to know what they offer, what they've offered in the past, what they're planning on offering in the future. You want to know their missions and value statement, their origin story. You want to understand like, how big is it? What's the department like that I'm going to be working with? What is the project this role deals with? Specific details from the job if you can. If you know who is going to be in your interview, if it's a panel, if it's 1 person, 2 people, you want to do some research on their professional histories. So where were they prior to this job? How has their role changed over time? Because it might be, for example, they came from a really big company and now they're working at a small company. So you can, when you're learning about the company, you can also use their past experience to say, hey, I know you came from a big company. What kind of adjustments did you have to make to work here? And what makes somebody more successful, a small company than a large company per se. So you're using their experiences to really get at some information within the company that can help you find those red flags if you know what you're looking for. So obviously the company website, the job description are the key sources of information for this initial research, but don't forget that you can also look at things like Crunchbase. It's used by investors, but it can tell you things like, how financially stable is this company? If I join, will it close in a year, right? You want to know, like, how far along are they on their research? Is it just prototype stage? Are they already selling? How frequent does their leadership turnover, right? If they've had 3 new CEOs in the last year, I don't know, right? So you want to look at some of those details that investors would look at to understand the stability of a company before you go into the interview, so that you also are kind of aware of the stability of the company that you might be working for. Glassdoor is a good resource from an employee perspective. People who've worked here in the past, like, what do they think of it, right? This is a good place to look for potential red flags. But keep in mind, just like Yelp or TripAdvisor reviews, nobody leaves a good review, right? You're not motivated to leave a review unless you've had a bad experience. So take those with a grain of salt. If you see 10, 20 that all are saying the same thing, maybe that's something to kind of believe a bit more than if there's just 2 or 3 that seem like anomalous and very different experiences. So take those with a grain of salt. And then for the personal histories, obviously LinkedIn is a great place to look and learn more about who you're going to be in the interview with. So now we know about the company, we need to look internally and learn more about ourselves. And you're like, what? I know me. I know everything about me. Well, let me tell you, I was in an interview once, and I have been around a long time. And they asked me about an experience that was like 7, 8, 10 years ago. And to be honest, I couldn't remember anything about like having worked there, right? Which is a really awkward situation to be in. So you want to have reviewed your personal history so that when they are ready to ask you about, oh, this project you did back in freshman year of high school with robotics is really interesting because, our medical device has some robotic pieces that are dealt with. Tell us more about that. And you'd be like, oh my God. But if you've had the time to go back and review and kind of refresh yourself on some of those details, you're ready. You can talk about it. You'll feel more comfortable with it. The other thing to review about yourself is, what are my red flags? So maybe you have children, or you are a caretaker for someone and you really need flexible hours. You need an employer who is going to be understanding about that and willing to work around your scenario. So a company that's really rigid with their time policies or time off policies, that might be a red flag for you. So you have to know that in advance so that you can create questions to ask in the interview to learn about whether or not that's going to be an issue. Knowing things about yourself, like how best you work with management. Do you prefer being, I don't want to say micromanaged. Do you prefer a lot of structure, or do you work best with no structure? Are you someone who wants to have kind of a project and work alone, or do you really love and crave a team environment? And if the job doesn't have those criteria, could you be happy in it? And knowing that about yourself can help you generate questions that will help you learn, is this job fitting within that? Or are there signs that maybe this is not going to make me happy and successful? Finally, you're going to rehearse, and I want you to rehearse both answering questions and also asking those questions that you generated about those red flags, right? To make sure that when you ask them, they don't sound like too aggressive or like you're too concerned about one thing. There's an art to crafting like a question that gets at that red flag. And so practicing how you ask it and working with a friend to understand, like, how does that actually sound if I asked you that question? What are you thinking? Like, how could we rephrase this? So that's really good. And your friend, hopefully, is a real person, but you can also just use recording. You can record yourself on your cell phone. And whether or not you do it with a friend, I highly recommend you record yourself, because in the moment, in the interview, all you have time to think of is like it's hard enough to just think of the answers to the question, let alone like, how am I performing in this moment? So take that burden off, just focus on answering the questions and asking the questions. And then later you can review and do the analysis piece and see how you did. When you're doing that, you want to review, here's some questions that you can ask yourself to know, how did I do, right? And this seems obvious, but the first thing is, did I actually answer the question that they asked? Or did I ask a similar, but not really the same question, right? So this is an important one that many people forget, is really pay attention to the question they're asking you. And if you listen back to your interview practice and you're like, I do that a lot, where I start talking and then I end up talking about something else and I never get around to actually answering the question they asked me, start practicing doing ask backs. So you want me to talk about my experience at Genco, and then they can confirm, yes, this is what we want you to say. Or if you're not sure you fully understood the question, you can say, you can ask for clarify questions. So something like, so do you want me to talk about a time when I was successful, or a time when the project didn't go as well, right? So you get the clarity you need before you answer. And that's something you can rehearse if you find that you're not doing that one. Think about, do I sound confident, and do I sound confident throughout? Are there times when my confidence kind of lapses? Is it that I'm getting tired towards the end of the interview and then I don't sound as confident? Or are there particular questions that make me sound like less sure? And if so, like, what are those questions? Have a look at them, practice those ones more, because clearly those are the ones that you don't feel as good answering. Then this goes back to that job description, right? You've probably already highlighted the technical skills and also the soft skills that they're looking for. And if it's something like, okay, they're usually looking for somebody who's either a real team player, right? If that's something they emphasize in the job description, listen back to your answers and see if you're demonstrating in those answers your team player style. And if not, maybe find ways to bring that in more. If they're really looking for someone who's great on details, who's very organized, have you in your answers demonstrated that quality? And if not, how can you rephrase those answers to really make sure that you are demonstrating those qualities that you know they're looking for from the job description? Make sure you've gone over your red flag list and asked the right questions. And if your friend can be the practice on this, right? And if they are giving you answers that don't help you get to the heart of whether or not that red flag is going to be an issue, try rephrasing those questions or figuring out a new question or a different way to ask it. And then think about your overall tone and impression, and see if that is actually what you want to be conveying. And if not, so that I forget the actual statistic, but I think it's like, if you come across as like overconfident to the point of like being egotistical, then 70% of employers wouldn't hire you. But if you're way over here on the other scale where you seem really not so confident, like 40% of employers won't hire you. So there's like you have to be careful and find that right balance. And then you'll be good. So bonus tip, the question comes up all the time. Tell me about a time when things didn't go well. And what they are really asking in this question is, where is your locus of control? When things happen, good or bad, do you tend to blame others or give others the credit? Or do you tend to accept the responsibility and recognize the role that you played in whatever the outcome was? So this question is not really about like, how did you handle the situation? It's more about how do you see yourself in the situation? So are you going to be someone who says, oh man, if I'd done this, this, and this differently, things could have been different? Or are you going to be the one, well, tech didn't give me what I needed. The marketing people were telling me one thing and the sales were telling me another. Like, be careful about pointing fingers and be sure to like own your mistakes. On the other hand, be sure to own your successes, right? They're also looking for someone who's going to be proud of what they've done and not say, well, I only was successful because this person did this for me and I got lucky here. Like, also own when you do things well. So that's what that question is about. Another common question is around change. If they are asking you about change or how you react to change, what they really want to know is, are you flexible? Are you Gumby, right? Can you adapt to a situation, especially in the way things change, especially with AI, things like that. If your job is going to potentially change rather rapidly, they want to know, are you capable of adapting with it? Are you agile enough to shift? Or are you someone who really needs the stability and focus and wouldn't do well in an environment where things are rapidly moving? So if you're someone who's like, actually, I really like structure, I don't really like change, and you hear them asking in the interview over and over again about how you deal with change or times when you've been flexible or adapted, that could be a red flag for you, and you may decide this job isn't right for you. Those are just two common questions and what they're really asking when they ask them. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, negotiating. Brian, do you want to ask Brian your question real quick before we move on?
Yes, yeah. Since you had a couple of sample questions, and I think I asked this in one of the previous sessions for this series. The tell me your greatest weakness or something along those lines. I always hate that question. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on the best way to answer it, or sidestep it, or how to handle it gracefully if that comes up.
Yeah, don't sidestep it. Be honest, right? So nobody likes the answer of like, well, I'm just too particular. I'm just too perfect. I just always get like, those are kind of like non-answers, right? They're like, and I'm too good answers, right? Honestly think to yourself about what am I bad at? So for me, I am not great at asking for help. I try to do too much on my own. And the key to answering that question well is to not stop there, but add on what you are doing to get better at it. So you say, yeah, I think my problem is I tend not to ask for help when I need it. I wait till it's kind of, a crisis before I will be willing to ask for help. So what I've been trying to do recently is check in with myself early on in a project and point out the times in the project where I can anticipate I might want help, and not waiting to that point to ask for help, but setting up those meetings at the beginning of a project. So now you've demonstrated, yes, I have flaws, everybody does. I'm aware of them, which is a step above most people, frankly. And B, I'm actively taking action to try to improve it. And then you're like golden, right? Because everybody wants a candidate who's actually constantly trying for betterment. So that's how I would answer that.
Great. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Negotiating. All right. So there are two ways that you can negotiate. You can try to get a bigger piece of the pie, or you can try to grow the pie, which automatically makes your piece bigger, right? So when we're talking about that, when we're asking about a bigger slice, we're essentially talking about salary, right? And this is a question that they're invariably going to ask. What is your desired salary? First step is to try not to answer and try to get them to benchmark it first, right? You want them to say, and hopefully, and in some states it's now required, they will give a range in the job description ahead of time. So you'll have some concept. But if they haven't done that, try to flip the question back and say, what have you budgeted for this role? Right? So that they are the ones giving that information first. Doesn't always work. Sometimes you'll just have to answer it. If you are forced to answer, always, always, always give a range. Don't tie yourself to a single number, but give a range. How do you come up with that range? Well, you want to base it on something, right? The main thing you want to base it on is the market. You want to have done your research. You can look at Glassdoor. You can look at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can look at salary.com or payscale.com. Always try to use the zip code that you are in, not the job is in. So especially if it's, only if it's remote, right? If you're going to relocate, obviously do where the job is. But if it's remote, go based on like your current location, if you're going to continue to be there, rather than where the company is headquartered. And you want to try to get the title as close as possible to what you would be doing, right? There may be other factors like number of years of experience, special skills, that might be hard to get at with the salary calculators on Glassdoor and something, but at least it gives you a starting point. It gives you a range. And then you also want to bring in your value. So if there is something, maybe you're one of the very few people in the world who both do coding and also have material chemistry, right? Like, yeah, I don't know, right? So you want to think about what are your special sauce that you bring to the position that you can really hype up and explain. I think I'm worth this because of, a qualification that you have, a certificate that is unusual to have, your past performance at a prior job. I increased efficiency by 70% at my last company, which, saved them $10,000 every month. So I know that like I can bring that kind of value. So I know I'm worth this, 4-figure salary or whatever. So you're always going to give them not just the range. It doesn't end at this is my range. This is my range because I've looked into it and based on what I found, this is the market range and here's what I bring. So I think that I am worth this amount or this range of amount. Now, when we're talking about a bigger pie, we're really talking about the whole compensation package, and it's called a package for a reason. There's so many things that go into it. So if there are reasons why the company cannot budge on salary, and I'll touch on some of those later, you can find value in other ways. So maybe, for example, it's really important to you to have healthcare, and you can say to them, I see you offer healthcare, but it doesn't include dental or vision, and that's really important to me. Could that be included? Right? Or, I'd really love to be reimbursed for childcare if that's an option. Or maybe you need flexible schedule, right? Or maybe you really enjoy travel, so you're willing to take a salary that's below your expectation if you get an extra week of paid vacation, right? Or maybe you want to do something that's tied to performance. You can say, I realize you're going to be taking a chance on me, so I'm willing to accept a lower salary. But let's do this. Let's set up some targets. And if I meet these targets each quarter, I get a bonus of X, Y, or Z, which would then, bring you closer to the salary that you were hoping for to begin with, right? So you can kind of build it that way. Maybe you have to relocate. You want to ask for relocation expenses. You can, if you're going to be working remotely, you can say, hey, I'd really love a Herman Miller Aeron chair or like a standing desk. And maybe they would reimburse you for setting up that office space. Maybe you have to drive into the city every day and you're like, man, parking is like $150 a month. Maybe you can repay me for my parking, or you can pay for my Charlie card or whatever, right? You can also ask for tuition reimbursement or to be paid to take courses and say, hey, there's this course on negotiations I'd really love to take. Could you cover that, right? That would help me be better at, my job for XY reasons, right? So there are ways that you can get a lot of value out of the company that is not directly, a dollar amount in your salary, but actually saves you a lot of money and can compensate for that because it's something that you actually want more of. And often these align, right? So employers want you to get more certifications, be more educated. So they're willing to kind of pay for that because they know they'll recoup the value on that. Or knowing that your, work satisfaction, because you have that extra vacation time, you're not going to burn out. It's a win-win for them, right? So really think about these things as when you're growing the pie, you're growing it for both you and the employer, looking for those common ways where it's going to generate value for both of you. So the other thing to always consider when you're negotiating is what actually is the situation. So what is the market like right now? Is it, are they desperate for workers, or are workers desperate for jobs, right? So are you a strong candidate and they would be just as happy with their number 2 choice, or are you the strong candidate, right? Those are 2 very different bargaining positions. And if you push too hard when you're just kind of a good enough candidate, you may end up pushing yourself out of a job, right? So knowing like what the environment is going in can help you understand how far you can push. There may also be internal limitations on what they can offer you. So for example, like maybe they have, polymer engineer, and now that person, there's too much work for that one. They're hiring a second one. But it's the same role. This guy's been in the job for 5 years and he's gotten like a 2% raise every year, but that means he's still only making, I don't know, 65K a year, right? But the market value for that job right now is 75K, and you're perfectly justifiable in wanting that 75K because that's what the market is paying. But they can't justify giving you that money, and the guy who's been there forever is making 10K less than you. If that person found out, there could be a lawsuit, particularly if they're female and you're male, right? Or for any of those reasons, like they have to keep the internal pay equity scale like there, right? They have to be aware of like pay transparency and how that might affect morale if they bring in someone at a much higher rate than what other people in the company are getting. And that's no fault of your own. That's just the situation the company is in. Or maybe they're, this year's been tough for a lot of companies. There's been a lot of layoffs, right? There just isn't the money to put into salaries right now. So they may want to pay you. They may think you're worth it, and they just may not have the funds. And so that's a decision you have to make. Are you willing to accept that trade-off? If you really love other things about the company or not. So back to the follow-up part. So you remember this complicated diagram of how many people are actually involved in the hiring process. And so sometimes hiring managers will assume that the HR and the talent acquisition people or the recruiter have gotten back to you, and so they don't worry about it. And sometimes the human resources people think the hiring manager has talked to you, so they don't worry about getting back to you. And so there's a whole host of reasons why you may never hear back, right? And I'm not excusing it. I think it's terrible. I really try to get all our clients to be more proactive about getting back to their people and not ghosting people. But it happens, and this is kind of why, because it's just a complicated mess. So that means it's kind of on you to force the follow-up, right? So after you apply, you'll hopefully you'll get something that says thanks for applying. And if it's really good, they'll even tell you maybe a time frame where you can expect to hear back. And if they do, you want to follow up after that time frame. If they don't give you a time frame, I would say give it a week or 2 and then say, hey, I applied at this time and this date for this role and just wanted to check in and make sure you'd gotten my application and didn't need anything further from me. And if you phone screen, you want to thank the person who phone screened with you. You can follow up and provide them with more detailed information about something they asked, or something you thought of later that they might find relevant, or a question that you had that you didn't get to ask. So find a reason to follow up that may not just be, hey, I want to know what's going on with my application. Like, try to find a way to make it kind of a more concrete response, that where you're giving something as well as trying to get some information back. Your interview, always, thank everybody you interviewed with, thank the person who helped schedule it, thank, if you went in and it was in person, thank the secretary, thank the janitor. And guys, don't underestimate the value of an actual written thank you card. I say send the email anyway, because things move fast. You want them to know that you are following up with a thank you right away with an email, but follow up with a nice card as well. It will make their day, right? People love getting mail. It's so exciting. If you have an address, this isn't always possible these days with everyone working from home, and then of course, if you get an offer, you need to respond right away, not with an answer, but with an acknowledgement that you received the offer, that you're going to take the next 24 to 48 hours to review it thoroughly, and you will respond at that point, right? So one email right away, I got it, thank you, I will get back to you at X time, right? And then keep to that deadline. Do take your time to review and respond. Okay, so if at any of those stages they've ghosted you and you're not hearing anything, I would say follow up after a week. And then if you still don't hear anything, you can send another follow-up after a week, and then give them kind of a longer 2-week period, a kind of final Hail Mary. Hey, I really wish I knew something, even if it's just that you're still thinking, you know, and after that, leave them alone. It's over, right? Like, you don't need to be so aggressive, but sometimes it does take 3 follow-ups, and you don't have to be afraid of like nudging them in that way, but also be respectful of their time frame. So if in the interview they said we're going to follow up in whatever time frame, you set your follow-up to be after that point, right? So yeah, so that's it, guys. That's all that I had planned to say. So we can now open it up to questions, and you can barrage me with anything you'd like to know.
Thank you. I found that very informative. So as you just heard, feel free to ask your questions. I am monitoring the chat, so if you don't want to be on the recording, I can read your question for you. Otherwise, feel free to just like unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Somebody had said handshake, and I don't know if that's the platform where you find jobs, or if you're if you're just shaking my hand. Cool. If no one has questions, maybe you can just kind of, for the benefit of everyone and yourself, put in what your biggest takeaway was in the chat, just like the thing you found most helpful. That also helps me kind of tailor these presentations to be more useful for the next crowd. So.
Okay, I'm also going to turn off the recording because I know that sometimes that is why.
Sure, guys, off the record.